you like my text messages? Why are we doing this? And I'll stop with the joke. We have other stuff.
What is happening? Is Vader on this phone call, or is that my earphones?
Hey there.
Hey. Looks like we have almost everybody back in.
Let's see. Sharon. I think so. District team.
I think we have one of ours not here.
So I don't see Hawk.
Right. Here we go.
Oh.
I just admitted him. So bing. Okay, I think we're all here. Except that Francisca went. But I think she went to help him get on, so he'll be back. Okay. We are all back again. Thank you for that time. We spent a lot of the time going. Thank you, Sean. Well, thank you everybody for sharing all the documents and everything. We tried to sort of track through the day that you sent in the schedules to see, what that meant in terms of certain things. And there were some areas that we weren't sure of what it meant. We basically wound up with a number of, we can get to the questions later on, but we wound up with what does that mean in a number of places, and how is that time actually supposed to be used with that label on it. And and we can get to that, but it dawned on us in our discussions that we were talking about a prearranged, it's not that we're not concerned with the schedule. We're actually, to a certain extent, you can create the schedule as the district. We just need to know that there's time for us to be able to accomplish certain things. And so if you can, what we'd like to do is we're going to go and present, we sent over that a presentation at some point today of, in other words, what we think the elements of a workday need to be. And we're going to do the screen sharing with you for sections 4 and section 6 of our document, so that you can see. It seems to me if we are able to get a sense of what this means in terms of the actual day, in terms of how the time is broken up, then we can spend time building a schedule around it that works for the students, and it will automatically be workable for the educator then at the same time. It's doing it in reverse that becomes confusing to us about whether or not we're meeting certain needs. So with that, I'm going to pass you off to Steve, who will introduce these sections.
Thanks, John. So let me get screen sharing going here. Oh, I need to be enabled to screen share.
I knew that. There you are. Oh, now you're the co-host. You are the co-host.
All right, so. Whoa. That is not what I intended to do. I'm still learning how to navigate having multiple screens to.
But it is, you are sharing the document.
Can you see, can everybody see the document now?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So the first two sections of the document are really related to when we get back to some form of face-to-face instruction, what it would, what the criterion might look like for eventually, I would imagine a hybrid model, then fully in school. Section 3 we hope to get to today, but since we're on the topic of workload, we want to scroll down to Roman numeral 4 here. And I'm not going to try to go word for word and line by line in any great detail, because we do want you to at least, we do want to at least talk through at a minimal level the sections 4, 6, and 3, and hopefully 5 as well. So section 4, number 1, it's really important. Our members have communicated to us pretty clearly that having access to their classroom is important to them. So not just once in a while, and not just some educators, but all educators having daily access to their classroom should they require it, should they need it. Mm-hmm. We have also heard from educators that there are some that do not want, under any circumstances, to navigate the public transportation and the other things that they would need to do to get into a building, and so they do not want to be, there are others that do not want to be required to be physically in a classroom while we're in comprehensive distance learning. So we'd like to have the flexibility, the ability to get in there whenever it's needed, but not have that be mandatory. Our members, many of our members have been anxious to have some level of provided curriculum, and what you shared with us earlier today, I think, is probably a great start for fulfilling that need. Of course, what can we say at this moment about whether or not it's good enough, whether or not it's useful, whether or not it's going to be meeting educator expectations of what they need? None of us can say that right now. And we would, of course, want to have an opportunity to provide our feedback on that really, really quickly, and have alterations made if it's proving to not be as useful as we were hoping it would be. Number 4 on the list there, for the duration of comprehensive distance learning or a hybrid model, our professional educators at home are having to alter their home spaces to become workspaces. Many of our members are needing to upgrade their internet speed to have greater bandwidth, to have higher speed. I know that myself, I've purchased a large additional computer screen, which I have never done before, but I've bought one because I know I'm going to need that. A nice office chair to sit in instead of a kitchen table chair. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that will be necessary to be able to work from home that we have not had to do before. So we feel that at a minimum, $100 a month stipend for our educators to cover the cost of increasing the bandwidth of their internet, and for the incidental purchases that would be necessary for being an at-home instructor. Our members have also told us pretty clearly that there's going to be some significant professional development needs, and there are very specific categories of professional development that have been mentioned by a number of our colleagues. Now, what are the best practices of being a distance educator? Just how do you work the virtual room versus the physical room? That's a different set of skills. It's a different art form, and we know that there are teachers out there that that's what they do. They work in virtual environments. So surely there must be professional developments that are designed for educators that work in virtual schools. And that should be a part of our first 2 weeks professional development, if that's not already a part of the plan. We also know that we're being asked to deal with the social emotional needs of our students in the midst of a crisis, but not everyone is a psychology teacher. Not everyone is a crisis counselor. Not everyone knows. I mean, some of us are just dealing with the trauma of the crisis ourselves, let alone how do we do that for our students. We're going to need some help in figuring out how to do that. We're all mandatory reporters, and we know what kinds of ways to navigate that when we're face to face with our students in our classrooms. This will be a very different kind of experience because in a way we'll be entering into the homes of our students. We'll be seeing things in the homes of our students that we would never have encountered before. And I think we're going to need to have some guidelines and some training on how are we supposed to react and respond to the things that we just incidentally happen to notice in the background of the spaces that our students are in. And what are our legal requirements and obligations around that? And what are our potential liabilities around that? Letter D on how to center virtual education for all students regardless of privilege. We know that not all of our students are coming to us with an equal set of needs, and how are we going to differentiate that, and how are we going to meet those needs? Grading, assessment. I know that Sean shared with us that some of the platforms that are being offered have the ability to do real-time multiple choice quizzes or whatnot. I'm really not sure how I am going to navigate assessment in a virtual environment. How can I know for sure that my students are the ones that are actually taking a quiz on the other side of the machine? How can I know that they don't have their phone up on the internet at the same time that they're taking a quiz? You know, what is the point of assessment in a virtual world? What's the philosophy of assessment in a virtual world? What is the practice of assessment in a virtual world? These are going to be very, very different things than in a classroom space. And we're going to need some help on figuring out how we would do all of that with some kind of consistency. Our students with special needs, our special education students, it's always a challenge to give our students exactly what they need, even when we're right there in front of them and it's very obvious what they need, and you can just physically do it right then and there. How we're doing that in a virtual environment, I haven't got the slightest idea. And you know, perhaps I'm slow, but I'm really struggling to figure out what does special education differentiation look like in a virtual world versus the physical classroom, and we're going to need some help with that. Completing child find evaluations remotely. These are things that will definitely be different, that we need direction on. And a lot of this stuff that's in number 5 here should probably be topics of that first 2 weeks. And if you're already starting to get the idea that 17 hours might not be enough to be comprehensive to cover all of those things and the tech support and you can start to understand some of the anxiety that many of our colleagues are having about having enough time to be professionally prepared to start just for day 1 with our students. Moving on to number 6, access to trained substitute educators to provide for excess caseload and for when we need to access leave. Our substitute force is going to be essential to us, I think, in helping to ease the workload perhaps in a co-teaching model with some of our special educators, or a co-teaching model in some of our classrooms. And then certainly for being able to step right in and fill in when an educator is ill or needs to take a leave for some time. It has always been difficult from a workload perspective to write a plan for your substitute. I can't tell you how many times I have woke up sick and thought to myself, it will be more work to try to prepare a substitute for me to be out for the next 2 days than to just drag my sick behind to school and just go teach anyway. It's a lot of energy and effort and time necessary to get a substitute, quote, up to speed to be able to even sort of do what you do in a classroom. We're going to need to have our substitutes partnering with us pretty closely so that they're able to, they know what's going on. They can just kind of, if they're co-teaching or partnering, or they're a part of the support force in a classroom, then they already know what's going on, and they can just kind of pick up where we've left off, continue the work versus have to be brought up to speed with the work. We really, really would like to see, we know that we are not bargaining here for our substitutes, that they are in their own contract, and we are not the bargaining team for substitutes. But our substitute educators, we think, are going to be essential partners, even more so than they've ever been in a virtual world. Number 7, student instruction that has a combination of synchronous and asynchronous lessons, as well as applied learning activities. We know that this is trying to figure out how we are doing all of these different categories of instruction as required under the ODE guidelines. We're going to need help in figuring out how that works. And looking at the schedule that's been provided so far, the idea of a schedule so far, we have concerns if that's how that's being addressed, that the balance there is perhaps not what it needs to be. Continuing. Number 8 is a reiteration of the workday proposal that we gave to you last week. And we've just, instead of putting it into explanatory language as we did last time, this is more in the language of a letter of agreement, where, again, if we have less than 3.5 hours out of a 7-hour and 45-minute standard working day for our educators, for every minute that there is less fully teacher-directed time when I am not required to dedicate that time to a specific task for being in front of a student, whether or not that's in a small group, or whether or not that's in an advisory, or whether or not that's in some type of one-on-one assistance that we're giving to students. Anytime that there is a scheduled time in the day where I am expected to be interacting for a purpose with students, that is not teacher-directed time. And if we don't have a 1-to-1 ratio on teacher-directed time to instructional or district-directed time, and we would define district-directed time as time that you schedule us to be with students, or time that we are scheduled to be in a professional development, or time that we are scheduled to be in a PLC meeting with our colleagues. There has to be a 1-to-1 ratio between that district-directed time and teacher-directed time, or this is not going to turn out as well for our students as we want it to. It just won't. I mean, we can pretend that it will be fine if we have an hour and a half of time in the day, or an hour and 45 minutes of time in the day, and that somehow it'll just all work out to be just fine. Because just a very cursory examination of the schedule that you gave us to look at, it appears, and again, we haven't had time to fully analyze it, but it appears that there's perhaps an hour and 45 minutes worth of usable teacher-directed time in any given day. And that's just not, that's not going to be enough. That is not going to get us where we need to be to provide service to our students and be able to create all these lessons, to be able to do all the assessments, to be able to gather and track the data, to be able to answer emails, to be able to be on the phones, to be able to fill out all the paperwork. I'm starting to get a headache just thinking about what March, April, and May were like in terms of how many emails and tracking and follow up with this and follow up with that were not a part of my regular teaching duties, that I never had to do before really in any significant way, but now became a regular part of my day. And that's just how it's going to be going forward. Plus whatever else we discover is needed after the school year starts. So please take seriously the very strong feeling of a supermajority of the educators who will have to deliver these services, that we need this time. And I know that we have the ODE requirements. There's something in the neighborhood of 2 hours worth of direct instruction that students are expected to receive on average on a daily basis. Something in the neighborhood of 1 hour to 2 hours of applied learning time that they should have on average on a daily basis. Something in the neighborhood of 2 hours of wellness and support, of which recess and lunch counts as part of that time on a daily basis. I think that there is a way for the students to get their 2 hours of wellness and support, their 2 hours of applied learning, their 2 hours of direct instruction, and educators can still get the time that they need as outlined here. I think that that is mathematically possible, and we need to kind of stop building schedules until we have agreed on the amount of time that teachers are going to have to do their jobs, because that's the cart before the horse. If we're building schedules before we know the buckets of time in the day that have been agreed to, then that schedule work may or may not be usable. It might be tweakable and you might be able to get there, but you might not. And it would be better to have come to an agreement on this before going too much farther down the road of committing to any particular schedule. That is my feeling, and I believe that is the feeling of the bargaining team. So at this point, number 9, I'd like to turn number 9 over to Francisca. She's our dual language instruction educator, and I just have to say that in our caucus, Francisca was very concerned that it did not appear that dual language instructors' needs, which were already extreme, it didn't appear that that had been thought through in terms of the supports that would be available for them, and that was of grave concern. But Francisca, if you would like to.
Yes, that's so true, Steve, and especially, you know, I really want Central people to think. I was very excited to see near PAT, or whatever the name of that app is, but we have to think about all the DLI programs that we have, and think about, is this available in that language from the planning perspective, from the get-go, instead of going, oh, how we're going to do this. So, I mean, it's number 9, it's brief. So educators who are in DLI materials and at least 5 partner languages of instruction. And if they're not available, I am very tired of translating materials, and we know how much is to pay for an hourly rate to a translator. So if the materials are not given to us in the language of instruction, we need to get paid for those hours that we have to spend translating. Not that I want to translate, you know, I mean, I want to spend my time differentiating instruction. I already have the material and the language that I'm going to teach. I'm reading the materials, and I'm applying how to better meet the needs of my students, instead of me trying to translate, trying to apply, trying to differentiate at the same time. That's very time consuming. So I really would like to have that and have professional development. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Have professional development in the language of instruction. I don't want to spend hours and hours and time emailing the people. Oh, we forgot about that. Oh, it doesn't exist. But this PDE will be in English. But the strategies you can apply it in your DLI program. It doesn't work that way. Even if it's one strategy, I need to translate that strategy to be able to teach that in my classroom. So the core curriculum, the standards have to be adjusted to the either in the hybrid model or in the comprehensive distance learning to meet the requirements of the language of instruction. So I want people to think ahead of time about DLI programs and not be an afterthought, like, oh, well, let's figure it out and see if this exists. Wow, it doesn't exist. You know, like I have to teach at that moment. I don't have time to be waiting for the district to translate materials or to find a company to translate, as we have been having issues with Lucy Calkins waiting and waiting. And so we have to think about how we're going to do it in a sustainable way, because our students are the ones who are getting hurt. Because if the material is not translated, we're not creating bilingual minds, because teachers are getting tired and they're just teaching in the language that the materials are available, or not teaching it. That's the reality. So yes, I just want to really emphasize that we have to think about DLI as we are planning all the work in English.
Thank you, Francisca. Charity, I think special education is, of course, the other incredibly overburdened category that will need special attention during this time. So if you'd like to continue.
Thank you. So we've tried to think about the different, like really separate things out. So we have the need to address the backlogged work from the spring, including evaluations. And then we have the need to look at the current school year and current needs that teachers are expressing in order to be able to support our students and families. So item 10 really talks about 10 and 11 talk about the backlogged work. So providing the option for educators, if they choose, to modify the start day of the school year and begin 5 days earlier, if they would like to do that, but not required, in order to address backlogged paperwork, missed IEP meetings, to get some of the evaluations started. And then item 11 talks about what to do as we continue, because some people are not going to be able to access that 5 days. Other people are not, that's not going to be a sufficient amount of time. So thinking about similar to current contract language that we already have, that special education teachers can access a substitute teacher, or if that's an option in their role. For some of our teachers, like our educators like psychs and SLPs, accessing substitute teachers is not an option. So, or voluntarily, if they'd like to complete this work outside of their workday, then to be able to receive pay. And knowing that the impact of the backlog work isn't going to be something that can be taken care of in the first few weeks of school or the first month of school, because the ripple effect of the evaluations that were put on hold or is going to continue to impact as we look at completing those evaluations and the 60-day calendar. And then also just the workload impact year after year as we have way more evaluations due at the same time of the year. So just being thoughtful that that is going to need to be an ongoing option, that people can access subs or request pay. And that would be in addition to Article 6.5.4 of the CBA, that it is not coming out of those hours that are already identified in our contract, but that they would be in addition to that. If we are looking at, I'm actually, just because it's on the kind of the same, I'm going to jump to 13, that special education teachers and related service providers may utilize the first 2 weeks of school to coordinate with their gen ed teachers, that they can participate in job specific professional development and reach out to students and families. At those first 2 weeks that Sean Bird has described as having a third of professional development, a third of planning, a third of outreach to students, special education professional educators need that same time. So completing backlogged work can't just displace that work in those first 2 weeks. We need that time to plan and coordinate and receive professional development and be able to prepare for the upcoming school year. Back to 12, looking at if we are going to start doing some in-person assessments, that they need to be mutually agreed upon by parent, administrator, and unit member, that we need to have proper PPE, and that there needs to be established and provide sufficient safety protocols in writing. So just to keep our staff and our families safe as possible. Jumping down to number 14, the adapted PE teachers, so adapted physical education teachers or educators may deliver students to their students that are solely on their caseload rather than providing instruction to whole classes. Professional educators may request flexible work hours to accommodate working with parents and other district staff. Sometimes our hours need to be different to meet the needs of our families and our students, or to find times where we can coordinate and plan with general education staff. So number 16 looks at social workers, counselors, school psychologists, speech and language paths, and QMHPs. Will provide a combination of collaboration, consultation, and virtual services for students and families consistent with privacy and safety guidelines for their state licensing board and the district. And that these can be scheduled virtually or by phone, because we know that the being on the computer for so many hours every day is really challenging. So allowing some flexibility in how they are providing their services. 17 looks, sorry. The district will provide professional development specifically relevant to non-classroom educators that include new content focus on remote learning collaboration possibilities, social emotional supports for students, parents, and educators, evidence-based teletherapy techniques, and how to provide effective parent training and coaching online. And then 18 goes back to reinforcing that excessive screen time is not healthy for any of us. So looking at alternative ways to complete work and make contact with families. There needs to be an increase in floater support for school psychologists, SLPs, and related professional educators that don't have access to substitutes. We're trying to figure out like how to address their backlog of work and how to address the increase in their workload. And if you're able to hire a lot more school psychs and SLPs and reduce caseloads, that would be, ideal. But if that's not an option, then providing more floaters to help support a lot of that evaluation and that work and this direct service that students with receiving speech and language services need.
So number 20 isn't strictly speaking special education, and it probably should have been in its own category, but we recognize that there still needs to be some discussion around the special needs of ELL instructors and their students that may be unique to them, and we have not yet had time to fully hear from our members to help us to express their needs. But I'll scroll down to the special educator workday.
So our survey results, we had over 85% of our members respond. So that's excellent response rate. there's such a varying degree of type of job, and then also level that is supported from early child, elementary, middle school to high school, that there was a range. I mean, and so we're looking at people who are experiencing a significantly greater need than what's outlined here. But we worked to find that middle ground, and to also find something that is workable within the hours that we have. So we tried to outline some of the bigger job components, and then look at how much time is needed per day based on our overwhelming majority of respondents on our special education survey. So if you look, the individual planning time of 60 minutes a day to prepare lessons, communication and outreach to students and families, which is hugely important with our students, because a lot of our students just experiencing increased difficulty with distance learning, and things down to access. Like when online learning requires extensive amounts of reading, and you have children that struggle to learn how to read, that burden and that experience of distance learning is that much greater. And then families are experiencing more stress and more time. And so looking at that outreach to families is really important. Monitoring the online apps, adjusting instruction, and providing feedback to students so that those applied learning times can be meaningful, can really hit at the skills that they need to be working on. And so that we can go in, and if they are using those district provided apps and they're not getting a skill, like we can see that, and then we can go in and we can work on it with them, or we can assign different items, or we can pull up that exact activity on the online platform and do it together with the students. But that requires time to be able to monitor all of those different apps and monitor all of our students' progress. Progress monitoring and data collection, communication with general ed teachers, and then reading and responding to internal emails, and then paperwork. So if we just look at those larger buckets of kind of the responsibilities of our job, that comes out to 4.5 hours a day of educator directed time that we would need to be able to be functional and to be providing solid instruction to our students. And to be collaborating with general education staff in order to help with service delivery. And so then that looks at, if we have 2 hours and 45 minutes of regular teaching of time left within the regular teaching day, then we need to look at increasing the use of substitute teachers to support delivery of instruction, to increase paraeducators, and to help us deliver instruction. And then I just continue to put a note in here that we need to give additional thought to professional educators with high caseloads who are presently not presently being adequately staffed. So the SLPs, the school psychologists, and then just some learning center teachers that have really high caseloads, because it's not consistent building to building. And just a note in here that we also need that 30-minute lunch, because I know last year a lot of special educators just didn't get a lunch.
Thank you, Charity. It is so true that so many of our colleagues donate their lunchtime to trying to get the job done. Well, that's not an inconsiderable amount of things, and if it starts to feel overwhelming, how much is there to talk about workload? Well, that's how bad the workload is. It's pretty overwhelming. We wanted to also take some time today to talk about racial equity in our education process, and I think that Emmy, you were going to talk about this section, weren't you?
Before we, if we can, Steve, before we go on, are there any questions that you have on section 4 or section 6 that we went through? I mean, some things I think we're probably very close to agreement on anyway. Like I know the district is currently planning on and assessing the substitute educator workforce for technological materials that they have, and what sort of training and materials they'll need. So I mean, some of these things I don't think we're that far away on.
Mhm.
But I did want to give you a couple of minutes to ask any questions if you have any.
I would certainly defer to other folks on the district team if they have questions. I don't have any questions. I mean, we started to walk through number 4 during our caucus time. And John, I think you're right. I think there are a handful of areas where we're probably not too far apart. I think we have fairly similar expectations where the language might not be exactly the same, but we have probably pretty similar expectations about people coming to the buildings or not coming to the buildings. That's
Okay.
been already discussed as an option in certain circumstances for folks, but not a requirement. So I don't think that we're all that far off on 1 and 2, although we did have some wording, maybe tweaks that we would see there, just because obviously we need to make sure that that we're following the district guidelines and protocols on signing in, signing out,
Sure.
how many people can be in a building at one time, all of that good stuff. So, I don't think we're all that far apart on things like providing curriculum and professional development. Hopefully what you heard this morning, or I'm sorry, earlier, just feels like this morning, I guess, earlier in the discussion from Sean was a real commitment from the district to provide that curriculum support and also to provide professional development. So I don't think we're significantly far off on those areas. As far as when we get down into number 8, I understand your point that, and Steve may have said putting the cart before the horse in developing schedules before negotiating. I mean, that for us, the creation of schedules informs our bargaining positions. That is, without knowing what our administrative staff and other district leaders, as well as people on those committees, without knowing what their vision of a schedule looks like, it'd be very difficult for us to know what positions to take at the bargaining table as far as how time is divided up. So, I mean, and unfortunately, we're working with a very compressed amount of time right now.
Right.
So for us, that schedule, for our team, that schedule sort of advises us on positions at the bargaining table. So I think, still difficult to put into specific terms what's teacher directed, what's district directed. I think I talked earlier about the challenge of defining things like that independent student work. Is that student instructional time? Is that teacher directed time? What exactly does that look like? What I can tell you, just to be completely candid, is I don't think you'll see a real interest from the district side of decreasing the amount of student instructional time that you see mapped out on those schedules. I think from our perspective, it would really be shortchanging kids if we're not providing the maximum amount of instructional time that we can. And so you likely, if we're talking about like that high school, for example, reducing those blocks of time where students have access to instruction, I think we're going to have real difficulty with that. Realizing that there's still discussion to be had on those schedules. And again, I think Sean indicated that, that was always, it still remained a work in progress. But that's kind of my initial thoughts on that piece. That's about as far as we got, was kind of the 1 through 8. And then obviously we've had a lot of team discussion on both DLI and special ed. I think there's a considerable amount of work being done right now on figuring out how to address that backlog. I think it's not at the point of being concrete enough that we're able to, present what those options might look like at the bargaining table. But I'm hoping that becomes, we're able to do that fairly soon. So there has been conversation on our team about those topics, but we didn't get to a point of having, in our caucus anyway, trying to digest what you've given us today and working through it. We got about as far as 8 during our caucus time. So I don't know if anybody else on our team has any comments or questions before. Sounded like Steve, sounded like you were wanting to move on to another section to introduce it.
I did have one question, if I may. I'm struggling to get on and off mute here, so hopefully that worked. Hold on, I'm struggling that. Sorry, my computer's moving really slowly, so I was hoping, I know this is a lot of detail, but I was hoping for just a few more words about 9C, the clarification of emphasize required core curriculum standards. Could you say a few more words about what's intended there?
Mhm.
So we're not making assumptions.
I can, and Francisca should clarify, but there was an issue of, how do I put this? So there was a discussion at the last session that whether or not all elements of the core curriculum standards were going to be the same in a DLI program, or was there going to be an emphasis on certain elements of it, so that because of the nature of the DLI and trying to meet it in the times that in the amount of time and on a distance learning platform, because the amount of difficulty that that platform, the DLI program represents. But so that's what C is. But Francisca, you should please take that over.
Yes, so basically I asked Sean last time, and they said they're going to have a modified scope of sequence for core or priority standards that we're supposed to cover. And so I would like to have some more clarification on that. I look in the professional development that Lisa Blount sent, and there was some for math in English. I mean, all of English, none for DLI. So that's why I am, I would like to know more about it. What that development is going to be like, and what are I went in the math Bridges website, and I didn't have permission to open the modified scope of sequence. So, like, we need to know.
Yeah, so they are working on modifying it, distilling it to the most important standards. I'll follow up with Office of Teaching and Learning specifically about DLI, and I'm not sure if they've completed their work and modifying the scope and sequence yet, but I know that it's being worked on right now.
Does that answer your question? You're wondering, Sharon?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have any questions, but I appreciate the focus. I can tell that there's an understanding about how complex special education is by how many bullet points here around special education. So I appreciate, Charity, you digging in to work on this, and I'm glad to be part of this conversation as we move forward and make sure that we've got all the systems in place that we need to have for a successful year.
Thank you, Claire. We have, it's actually been kind of exciting to be able to go through and really delineate all of the different responsibilities that professional educators working in special ed are completing, and to look at some of the historical practices in Portland Public that have gone away, like having data clerks assigned to each building, in like having special ed secretaries that used to help with scheduling, or having other people were completing evaluations, and it wasn't learning center or focused classroom teachers. So when we think about historical practices that have gone away, and then that work just continues then to build onto the staff that we have, it's enormous. So it's really kind of exciting. And our survey, we have 45 pages of open-ended response comments that Peter and I are reading through. And so we're trying to kind of categorize and come up with more possible solutions. But but this at least gets us started.
Yeah, great.
And as I shared with Charity, I don't teach special education in one sense, but I hear from DLI, special education educators, that they are also struggling with workload, not only because of special education, but because they have to give service to students in different languages. So that means that they have to do different prep times. And I'm sure Claire have heard about that too.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, Claire, that SPED administration has heard about this, but there's been a lot of discussion too around translation and interpretation during meetings, and being able, like, needing that to be video option, and that it did not go well in the spring, and that really impacted our families and our staff, and it just didn't work. So
Yes. Mhm.
Were there
And
any
it
other
actually-
clarifying questions or comments that we had on sections 4 and 6?
Yeah, this is Lisa Rogers. I did have a question. I'm looking at number 14 in section 4 about the APE teachers. And so I did get to do some work with them before the end of the school year, but even with that, a bit of exposure that I got to their work and how they interact with students, I just was hoping you all could explain what that line is trying to accomplish, so I can make sure that we understand it.
Peter, do you want to speak to that? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that line, just to clarify, we don't want to see their workload expanded beyond the group of kids which they already have on their caseloads, which is significant. I know there's still a vacancy on that team, so we just wanted to kind of draw some clear boundaries around what their work is for in terms of who they're serving under distance learning.
Got it. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, really, some of these things, like, for example, our sections on the APE and the section on the backlog. I mean, Claire, we mean this. Actually, it's a problem-solving approach. We're trying to say, and I hope, when you get time to look at this, you'll, if just to sort of give you an idea of where we were coming from with this, we're recognizing that the educators have essentially two tasks. One is to somehow manage the difficulty that the learning, distance learning produces, and two, somehow being able to meet all of the minutes required by the state and federal government, which astoundingly, there was never any sort of separation from the two. The two had to go on at once. And so how is it that we are able to create a series of agreements that turns that into some form of something that can be actually accomplished? And I know that that's, Claire, what you've talked about doing also. So that's really the goal of what we have going on here. I guess that's stating the obvious, but I just wanted to make sure you understood it. It's not in any way an attempt to tie the hands. It's an attempt to try and get a workable situation.
Got it. Oh, thanks.
And I'll just piggyback on that, many of our, like, the backlog is like people, we don't really want people to have to work all these extra hours, even if they're getting paid to do it. But we also know that some educators find like, that they like looking at ways to use substitute teachers more as co-teachers, and being more strategic. So that burden of now I have to write sub plans, and we talked about this earlier, but even more so in such a specialized area, and looking at all of our different students' individual needs, that it becomes even that much more complex to try to figure out how to turn your direct service minutes over to a substitute teacher or guest teacher, so that then we can have this time. And so being really thoughtful and creative about how we are maybe partnering for, there was a significant portion of people that said they thought that having relief from a substitute teacher was a good option, but there was also a portion that didn't feel like that was going to reduce their workload. They felt like it was going to add to their workload. So.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you. I would like to just acknowledge that much of what we're addressing here is not specifically because of the pandemic. The pandemic has just laid bare how overwhelmed and overwrought and under-resourced our school system has become over the last 20 plus years. And teachers, professional educators have become consummate jugglers. We've just started throwing more plates up in the air. Every time somebody says, well, here's another thing you need to do, here's another plate in the air, and we just keep juggling more plates in the air and more plates in the air. And the pandemic came along, and that became that one extra plate that exceeds your ability to juggle, and now you're going to drop all of them. If we don't take away enough to bring that back into some type of balance, something that it is possible to actually juggle, you're just going to have a bunch of broken plates. And you know, we are not asking for, you know, something that will make life comfortable. We're asking for something that brings it back to a point where we can keep juggling and not crash. And I think it's important to recognize that. All right. So back up to section 3, and I think Emmy, you would said that you would go over this for us.
Yeah. So this section talks about our racial educational equity policy, or refers to it. It's not something that we just want to hear as a value and priority for the district. We want to see that it is. And so here are some things that we think are important that we agree to. Number 1, the district securing partners and resources to respond to the basic needs of students and families. So food, shelter, clothing, mental, social, emotional health supports. Somebody acknowledged earlier that we will be the front line for that. We're going to have regular contact with our students. And so just like we do in our regular classroom, we'll need to facilitate help for that. The district shall provide students and families access to online learning. We don't want to leave out whole groups of kids. So we need devices per student rather than per family. Internet access, that was such a problem, and technology support. And we'll talk later about technology support in home languages. The district should provide ongoing community trainings for parents on using all the necessary learning and accountability platforms, tutoring methodology for their kids, and content to help them better assist students in the educational processes. That is going to be a huge task for us. It was in the spring, and it will be again, especially with some of the platforms changing for certain ages of kids. Both teachers will be learning in some cases, and also parents. So really providing opportunities for them to learn and have training. All district support for families, including technology support, shall be in their home language, like we said. So that would could include interpretation services provided by video if requested by the family or the educator. We need dedicated staff teams to consistently support at-risk students who had limited or no access to instruction during the spring period, or students who have been out of contact with their teacher. So I think a lot of teachers experienced that, and you know, felt helpless for how to help these families, and so we need district support. The district shall make available paper materials in languages of instruction, as well as books, art supplies, pencils, manipulatives to support all students, including students receiving special education services, and then make these available at the school-based food distribution sites, and or deliver them directly to students' homes when transportation to these sites is an obstacle, which it often is. District shall mitigate risks for immigrant students and families who may be undocumented. So, for example, in contact tracing, using secure school student IDs in lieu of student names to protect them. The district shall publish specific communication plans to avoid marginalization of families where English is not a first language, and opportunities for parent feedback in all school community languages. So again, we're not leaving out parts of our population. The district shall provide ER pay or dedicated time during the workday for educators to implement programs and affinity groups for different groups of students. The the schools and our classrooms are often places where our kids can get together, and it's important for their identities and to be recognized for who they are. So our Black student unions, LGBTQ focus groups pay or time for that to be implemented. And here's another section on professional development during non-educator directed time, embedded time for things like building relationships, social emotional wellness, navigating differences across culture, power, and privilege, creating healing and relationship building norms such as community and restorative circles, both virtual or physically distant if that's appropriate. Thinking about mindfulness and social emotional learning activities. How to respond to trauma and collective grieving as it arises, which we hope it doesn't, but how are we going to help our students navigate those types of experiences? Culturally responsive sustaining instruction, anti-bias and anti-racist teaching. There's a lot of resources out there, and trauma-informed healing processes. Developing students' abilities to connect across cultures by affirming racial and cultural identities, and creating opportunities for students to learn from each other and with each other. So professional development in those areas. We also think it's important that the district coordinate a community effort with the purpose of creating childcare cooperatives for staff and PPS families. We know it's a huge issue for a lot of teachers, and it's a huge issue for families in this, this long-term distance learning environment. And so we ask that that is recognized. The district shall advertise prominently to students, parents, and educators hotlines and mental health referral services of sources to address the growing need as it continues into fall.
Thank you, Emmy. Questions?
I don't have any questions.
And, you know, just that all of you are, many of you probably are already aware, but the state put out in its Ready School Safe Learners, in each version of it, recommendations for equity, but not requirements. And what we did was we went through recommendations. Some of them came directly from there, and some of them came from what we know our community throughout Portland needs. And we know that the district has done some work in these areas. It's just that certain things, you know, they're of extreme importance at this point. Like, for example, how to handle trauma. Unfortunately, it's something that educators do at times in their classroom, but that's because there is a community that has been developed in the face-to-face world of a brick and mortar school. And how is that community developed, and how can we go about doing that, and how do we provide those resources for kids? That's extremely important. And we didn't want to have, since all these things so directly affect the lives of the educators who are trying to support the kids, we wanted to have these things called out specifically.
Thank you, John. I want to highlight the importance of providing support to our families in how to use the technology that will be in their homes and how they can become effective at-home supporters of their child. Parent anxiety is super high. We know that many of the parents felt overwhelmed by their role as tech support and their role as supervisor to their student while their student was learning. And if we are unable to provide robust support to families to make them feel more comfortable and competent in supporting their students, this is not going to start, the year is going to start really, really rough and stay that way if we don't have some readily available, widely accessed support for parents and families that are, especially for younger students, where they're just not going to, they're not going to be able to navigate it well without an adult who's right there helping them to figure it out. And unfortunately, that has to be a parent or other family member or caregiver. It isn't going to be possible for the professional educator to do all of it. So that I hope that we will see a very significant plan from the district on how we're rolling out that community support soon. All right, John, would you like to cover section 5? Unless there's somebody else who feels they want to do this one. Don or Peter?
I'm good. Hey, Steve, can I just intervene for half a moment?
Sure.
I appreciate the focus on the needs of our students, especially that holistic, all the needs, right, which impact the learning environment and the ability for students to function in the curriculum environment. And I wanted to address specifically that we have a series of family engagement focus groups that our engagement team is working on and has been conducting over the course of the past month or so, like 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, that has been really informing us on what are the critical needs of our students and families through this. So I look forward. I know that you and many other PAT members were also part of support through the PPS, the Fund for PPS in the spring. And I think these are really important points, and I look forward to our continued partnership on those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And you know, section 5 really gets down to sort of the nitty gritty of some of the things that we've actually spent a great deal of time in March through June. You'll recognize some of these because it's sort of what we landed on as we moved through elements of this. So you'll see this is where we get into questions about what sort of leaves do people have access to, and you know, what happens when it takes place. So you'll see, for example, number 1 is simply a sort of statement of sort of philosophy. Question number 2 was an issue that we worked out through both sections. It's extremely difficult for teachers to be able to do the normal things that they do in terms of managing student conduct and behavior. And one of the issues that in the last agreement that we came up with was that a teacher can't be held for a student's misuse of technology if they cannot tell that it's taking place. So, you know, I can walk around the room as an educator and know that a student has their phone out and is texting a friend, but I don't know that online. So, you know, while those things are taking place, an educator can be doing everything they can, and a student may not be engaged. So in all instances, we said here that we do recognize that although the discipline is one issue, we do agree that a teacher has to obviously comply with all mandatory reporting requirements. We agreed before, and I think it's important that we continue to do this because frankly, our evaluation tool doesn't match with the circumstances of online distance learning. You know, what is it, 96 elements and, you know, 4 domains and blank number of components and all these other things. And the vast majority of them don't have anything to do with online learning. So what we have agreed before, and we think we should continue, is that in essence, there's a suspension of the evaluation process until we get back to in-person learning.
Hey, John, can I stop you on that one real quick?
Sure.
I certainly don't disagree that our evaluation tool was not made for distance learning. Obviously, that goes without saying. I think we're going to have to figure out something here because we could very well, hopefully I'm not just being, you know, a naysayer. We could end up in distance learning for the entirety of the year. I mean, that's certainly one possibility, right? And I don't know that we're going to be in a position to have no evaluations occur for the entirety of the year, especially You know, we have third-year probationary folks that the district has to make a determination on whether to move to contract status. We have first-year probationaries who need feedback on performance, and so it seems like there's work to be done here, because I don't disagree with what you were saying, that the tool doesn't match the teaching environment. So I don't know that I have an answer here, other than I think it was one thing to say for the remainder of the spring, since we're in kind of this emergency condition, we're not going to try and do evaluations then. I worry a little bit about saying what could be the entirety of the school year, we aren't going to evaluate folks. So that one worries me a little bit. I don't know if I have a good answer right now. I just wanted to put that out there.
I agree, and I understand where you're coming from, and I just didn't want to say out loud at any point that we might be in this for the full year.
Sorry.
But yeah, I get where you're coming from. And if that's the case, I do think we have to have a good faith effort, and I know there will be on both sides' parts, to sit down and say, what do we expect, and what is a fair evaluation of educators in distance learning? And we can either come up with a simplified version, or scour the country for some form of an evaluation tool for online learning that already exists.
Yeah, I mean,
I know Hillsborough School District, I think you were actually maybe part of those discussions,
yes,
developed an online school years ago, and
Yep.
I believe came up with a separate evaluation tool for that, so we could borrow from some of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I think you're right. And obviously, if we're able to return to in-person instruction, you know, before too much of the year is gone, then it's a little bit easier of a
yes,
issue to deal with. So I'm not trying to jinx us or anything. It just that feels far off to me right now.
well, in related to that, number 5 was the question of what happens to a person who's been notified that because of a brick and mortar setting, they had an area that they needed to work on in a plan of assistance, but there's no way to actually work on it in a plan of assistance because the conditions don't exist. You know, it's very difficult to improve professional practice in some element of the rubric, or what a teacher does when the environment is so radically changed. So with that in mind, we were going with what we had before, basically, that we agreed to put plans of assistance that were there on hold, essentially, for a short version of what they're going to be held in abeyance until regular instruction resumes. We did say that if the two sides want to get together, and this is something we also agreed to earlier, so I'm sure your team will fill you in on this, Brian. But to the rest of the district who are here, this is something that we agreed to in our discussions leading up to it, that if both parties, the educator and the administrators, say, well, we believe we could probably work out what the guidelines will be when we do get back, there's no reason why those meetings couldn't happen if they both agree that that's an appropriate thing to do. Number 6, we just want to make clear that during, you know, educators are going to continue to accrue all leaves, and that they'll have the right to different leaves. So those, although the rest of everything else doesn't, may not be, elements of the contract may not be in place, certainly all of their collective leaves are still there. So, you know, professional development time, professional improvement time, all the different forms of leave that were there are still applicable in this time period. We wanted to spell that out specifically.
I don't have any other questions other than the ones I brought up about evaluation. Sharon or anybody else, I don't know if you have any questions. Okay.
No,
I would,
no.
Go ahead, Sharon.
No, I was saying I don't at
Okay.
this point have questions yet.
I would just like to mention that in the past, it has been a lengthy process to develop an evaluation tool that was mutually agreed on. And we have 21 days until the start of school. And it would be my hope that discussions around a mutually acceptable evaluation tool that could be created to be specific to a distance learning environment would not be something that prevents us from being able to get resolution on the critically important matters that we need to get resolved to get school started in 3 weeks. So I'm putting that out there as a challenge to my UniServe family here, as well as to to the district team.
Yeah, it only took us 2.5 years to get the rubric that we have now. So I commit to half that time to get the distance learning evaluation.
Oh, John, thank you for saying that, because that points out my concern.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Well, I think that is what we wanted to make sure that we walk through with you today. And I know it's a lot. Sections 1 and 2, unless John, you feel differently, I feel like
No.
we would do those at another time.
Mhm.
Yeah, 1 and 2 deal with what are the metrics and processes for getting back to a hybrid model and eventually a return to school. But you know, given the time constraints we have and the fact that we have to get the online learning agreements worked out, I think that is best for the next steps.
Okay. Well, as far as next steps, again, we've went through your proposal about as far as what I kind of gave you some verbal thoughts on. So I don't have much else to add on the other pieces because we simply haven't had a chance to review that as a team. So just trying to think of a way, or what do we want to do with, we've got, 30 minutes or so left on this session. I don't know if we want to call it a day. Our team would probably spend some time having discussion at that point, or if there are other things that we want to tackle today, that would be fine as well. So,
well, I mean, we did have, and they are not fully formed. They're just questions that we were working on as fast as we could when we were in our
great
caucus. But I mean, there were elements of it where we looked to say, where are there commonalities between the schedule that you were talking about and the guidelines that we were doing, because, yes, we are, for example, in the middle school virtual schedule, there was a term called advisory, and under a brick and mortar session, advisory was a particular thing that took place in, I can't even say all middle schools, but many of them. And they were almost school specific versions, and they weren't uniform in the way in which they were presented. So there are things, for example, where we say things like, okay, we need time for, feedback to students, that sort of thing, or we need time for this or for that. I mean, it would help us to get a sense, we may actually agree with elements of the presentation schedule or the schedules that you presented if we fully knew how they would work out in that. So, I mean, so terms like advisory, Sean, if you're still on this, and I think you are, what do you see happening in the 45 minutes of advisory in the middle school?
I would have to clarify for you because I have not been involved in those discussions, but what I understand is SEL is social emotional learning goals is what would be accomplished, but I'll double check on that for you.
So that's similar to the sort of lessons and prepared activities that were being done prior to the shutdown.
I think so, yes.
And you have in there, say, for example, in the middle school schedule, 1:45 to 2:30, and you have small group work and office hours. So for office hours, we saw that as sort of one-on-one contact with students, but small group is obviously not one-on-one contact with students. How did the district see that block of time that you have set? I mean, I realize it's in a couple of different places, but how would that work?
Yeah, I think the group was trying to give flexibility that either they can meet with kids in small groups, or they could, because kids will be working independently during that time. So it's if teachers need to pull small groups, they can, or if they need to, use that time to. I mean, it's kind of just based on the needs of the class that the teacher has, what they would do at the time. But I can get more clarification from the group that worked on that. Yeah.
And I guess last but not least, do you see the grade level PLC as being entirely teacher directed, but working in groups, or do you see that as specific tasks and topics that are directed by the administration?
And grade level PLCs are, you know, that's where they do planning together, but I think that there are principal directed activities in the grade level PLC. So I'll confirm that. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll confirm. Yeah.
Other questions on that, John?
No, and you know, Sean, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I know,
No,
you know, you
no
got
worries.
different committees working different places, so it's
No
hard to
worries.
be able to have the answer. But those are some of the, to give you an idea, again, to try and clarify this, we were looking at the schedules and trying to find commonality. So that if we said things, for example, like time to contact families, did you sort of have that in another name in a different portion in the schedule, or was that something that's completely different? You know, so if we're looking for 30 minutes of that and you have, you know, in your schedule, you built in, I don't know, 20 minutes of it, well, we're really pretty close on those types of things. Or do we see really a school day working entirely differently than the district does? That's what we're trying to get a sense of.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close on a lot of those things. I think, you know, part of what we were trying to do is respond to what we heard last time from you guys, from you all about the need to have some flexible time. So that's why you see some flexibilities built in there. I think, you know, we're just trying to balance that. We need to make sure that, because attendance has to be taken, grades have to be assigned.
Sure.
So we're just trying to balance, you know, how much teacher facilitated time there is versus how much time students are working independently at home. And we have to be sensitive to the needs of our families whose parents are trying to manage their own careers and, you know, all of that. So I think some of those things in the schedules are designed to be ambiguous because it will depend on the teacher and what they how they're managing their class. And during some of the time when kids are working on their own work, asynchronous times, yeah, you definitely, teachers could use that time to call families and to make contact with parents if they need to. So I think it's about us defining more clearly some of our things on the schedule, as you guys asked. I took some notes earlier when I was presenting to you, so we'll get some answers to some of those questions to clarify.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Kathleen, I think you were presenting the K-5 originally. I might be messing that up.
Yes, I did.
Okay, I was just going to say, we were thinking, you know, I know you're going to be coming back with a schedule, but we're looking for a time that specifically builds in time for the, you know, for lack of a better term, I never like this term, but the specials to be part of the student day, because they're part of what means as you know, I know you're not saying anything you don't agree with, but all of those activities and all of those areas of student development are an important part of the student school experience. So we were looking for, in a sense, the day that was spelled out there for the K-5 is sort of my sense of it was, I'm educator A, and I have this way I'm breaking out my time and it's filling up the student day, so to speak. But really we're looking for, remember that there are other educators who need to be working with those students, the same grade cohorts, which changes the amount of time that teacher A is working, because teacher B, C, and D will be working with those students as well. And, you know, we think that if that sort of thinking is applied to it, that we're probably not going to be, you know, we're probably going to be pretty similar in the way we're breaking up the day.
Yeah, and there was 30 minutes under the asynchronous learning part designated for specials specifically for both K2 and 3-5. But of course, as anyone here who's taught knows, that sometimes varies from day to day, you know, as we say, you could have common, you know, PLC time in a brick and mortar situation, that is.
So, and I have a question for Kathleen too. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious to know which committee is working in the elementary schedule, because I am part of the instructional core cell school advisory. And we talk about creating a schedule, but we didn't get to there. Those are only an hour meetings. And I'm just out of curiosity, I would like to know if there are some DLI teachers involved in that creation, because I'm trying to process that schedule in my head to see how I will apply it in the classroom, and it's very overwhelming.
Yeah, what I do know is that Emily Glasgow is leading the committee, but I don't know specifically all of the other committee members. I know there's principal as well as teacher representation, but I don't know specifics.
Okay.
But I'd be happy to get that information if you like.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen, for getting that information. I didn't know there was another committee in addition to the other committees, so that's good to know. I'd love to know who's on that one. And I wanted to ask a question about the middle school schedule. I know we have been engaged in lots of different kinds of conversations about how many periods to have at middle schools, and there's been an effort by the district to add 7 periods to some schedules. When I looked at the schedule you provided, it looks as if the periods are the same length for schools with 7 periods or 6 periods, and that the schools with 7 periods, teachers would just get less planning time. It's just an additional period added to their workday. And of course, that's not how the math works. It's if the district decides to divide, with high school schedule, 4 periods means instead of 8 means students, have more time in each period. But with the middle school schedule, if you're going to add a period onto the day, there has to be an alternate schedule so that, or perhaps that means teachers are still teaching 5 out of 7 rather than 6 out of 7. But we want to clarify and make sure that the thinking isn't just to sort of add an additional period of teaching onto the teacher day, because that would mean they would have less time instead of more time to plan and prepare for the classes they are teaching and to meet the needs of their students.
Yeah, so I actually I noticed that too, and I sent a message about that already, asking the question about how that would change. The schools that are 7 periods, some of them are 5 of 7 and some are 6 of 7, right? Currently.
We were engaged in some discussions about this before the pandemic hit, and honestly, I don't know that there are any that are 5 of 7, but
I'll get clarification on all of that.
Yeah, and part of the discussion.
I noticed that in the schedule how the time that one day was cut, and then they have class, and part of it is planning. So we'll adjust. We'll look at
Sean,
that.
It's how the day, again, in those settings, the difference is, as I understood it at the time period, was some were doing it as advisory. That advisory was different from one school to another school. It was a movable feast of schedules, so to speak. And so it was really hard to get, in our office, it was very difficult to get a sense of what was happening district-wide on the middle school schedules.
Okay, so, and also just so, I don't know if I've told you all this or not, but in OSP, we did some reorganization of the schools. So the middle schools are all in one cluster, all in one cohort together. So they'll be able to, the principals are in one cohort. So they'll be able to report to one senior director, and they'll help provide some continuity of for things like this, for schedules and things that are issues that are, just known to be middle school specific, so principals can collaborate more. So hopefully that'll bring some more consistency about for middle schools.
And I think on that, just, I know there's been a lot of talk about the high school schedule, and that that 8 periods is a lot for anyone to be managing over a distance learning environment. And so it's interesting with middle schools, it looks like the intention is for some students to have 7 classes and an advisory, which is also 8 classes to check in with. And so I think just making sure we're considering what the experience is like for students and families trying to navigate this. And this might not be the time to add more elements to students' days beyond what we have planned or staffed for, but to make sure that we're doing what's important, doing it well, and putting in the time to make it work.
Yep.
I just had one question for Kathleen. For asynchronous learning, asynchronous can mean a lot of different things, not just pre-recorded not live lessons, but pre-recorded lessons on video. Was there a reason you characterize that as pre-recorded?
This is again what the committee had worked on, and what they put in there is that it could be pre-recorded, or there could be times when it is taught personally by the teacher. But the ODE document actually gives a really broad definition for asynchronous learning. That's about a paragraph long. So it's really, we want to follow the ODE requirements as much as possible to make sure we're meeting the instructional minutes. So as long as it fits within that description that the state describes, that's definitely, I think they were putting that in there to try to make it, well, I'm not sure what the thinking was behind it specifically, but
it could be lessons that are created and posted and not necessarily video. Video could be one type of asynchronous, but it could also be other types of activities and lessons that they do and that are posted to the platform, right?
Yeah, what I recall is that it's supposed to be teacher facilitated in some way. So yes, that could potentially work as long as a teacher is reviewing the work or can provide guidance, you know, if needed for students.
And that's the feedback. All right, thank you.
Well, and I'm hoping that that's where some of like, where we talk about like getting materials into students' hands and having hands-on activities and having like being able to send home math manipulatives and games that they can play that support the instruction, like that, being able to have those types of experiences where it's not on screen and it is the asynchronous learning that then like maybe the game is taught and then they play it at home and then you come back and you add a new component to it, things like that, where it's not all screen based and they have manipulatives and hands-on experiences.
Unless anybody on my team has other questions. I mean, I think at this point, you have essentially all the things that we were asking at this point, and we have an idea of the schedule. We're scheduled for the 10th from 1 until 5, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully we can come back with work on both our sides for continuation of the workday. You know, basically sections, what was it? 4, 5, and 6. There may be elements of section 3 that Emmy presented, which may be already agreed to by the district. And I mean, I think that they are in line with I hope that they're in line with the district's concepts already, and we might just be able to move. So hopefully we can come next time with both teams ready to take a look at certain elements. For example, you said there might be a difference in language as it goes to access to the school buildings and everything else like that. If that's the type of thing we can get to next time, since I think we understand the ideas back and forth that both teams have, then we might be able to get some real traction and headway in the next session.
Yeah, in fact, if we have some suggestions, we may send them electronically before.
I think that's great.
On Monday.
Yep, that would be fantastic.
Great. We're good on the ground rules too, John. So however we want to get that finalized.
Okie doke.
So, all right. Thanks for everybody's time today.
Before we break, could we talk about whether or not we have agreement to have another meeting on the 17th?
Yeah, I think the district asked whether or not we were willing to go on the 17th, and the answer is yes.
Okay.
I know we start on the 24th with teachers in buildings, I believe I could be wrong, but I think that's the time. And that means we need some, more than the 10th and the 17th, we need some other days nailed down in there. I'm thinking the 20th and 21st certainly would be, important, but we're open to other days in addition. Has your team, I know that we are sort of on Mondays, but has your team had a chance to evaluate the schedule to see other days?
Yeah, Lisa, do you have that down? I don't, I'm not as organized as you.
John, we spoke right before this meeting about some days in the week of the 12th. And so I need to take that back to my team and see what their availability might be at this point. And then you just mentioned the 20th and the 21st.
Mm-hmm.
that what you said? Okay, so we haven't had a chance to talk about those. So, so let me loop back with everybody and I'll send you an email.
Okay. I mean, we have, there is time on the 12th. We have, on the 11th, as you and I talked about, where hopefully maybe the afternoon could be available. I know the morning we're involved in a settlement discussion on another issue, but we could work in the afternoon and we're open to that. So we're just looking to get as many possible dates on as we can. And we recognize not everybody on both teams may be able to be present, but we're certainly willing to, continue even if one person is not here.
Okay.
John, you said the 12th. Did you mean the 10th? We have time on the 10th, but we don't have a schedule for the 12th.
No, what I was saying was I believe that there is we have on our schedule, I think for a lot of our folks, time on the 12th.
I see.
Okay. Thanks. We'll go over those.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
District team, can you join